Most men will read this and still lose her. The few who understand it will never chase again. It is what nobody tells you. A woman can receive flowers every week, hear I love you every morning, and still leave. But one calculated sentence from a stranger, one calm, unshakable phrase, and suddenly she's texting her best friend at 2 de la mañana saying she can't stop thinking about him. That's not coincidence. That's psychology working exactly as designed. eBay watched it happen. eBay felt it happen. And I'm about to hand you the blueprint most men spend their entire lives never discovering. Stay until phrase number 8. Because that one phrase, the one most men are too afraid to say, is the one she'll repeat to herself for years. Almohadilla almohadilla asterisco phrase 1, the silence weapon. Here's something nobody explains about attraction. The loudest man in the room is almost never the most magnetic. It's just the most desperate. Women are surrounded by noise from the moment we wake up. Texts pinging, compliments sliding into inboxes, men performing, men explaining, men trying. We filter it automatically like background static. But silence? Silence cuts through everything. There is a specific man I remember. Not because he said much. Because when he finally did speak, the whole room seemed to shift. It had this quality, this unhurried, deliberate stillness, that made his words land differently. Like they had weight. Like they were chosen. And then he said it. Casually, without drama. Asterisco I don't pursue what isn't already drawn to me. Asterisco something shifted inside me immediately. Not because it was romantic. Because it was honest and dangerous. It told me he wasn't going to perform for my approval. It told me he'd already decided his own value. And that single decision to ration his words, to choose silence over noise, made everything he said feel like a verdict. The science behind this is documented. Scarcity increases perceived value. In economics, in marketing, in human desire, what's rare feels precious. Men who flood women with words become wallpaper. The man who speaks once, clearly, without apology, becomes unforgettable. Your words are currency. Stop inflating them. Almohadilla almohadilla asterisco phrase 2, the frame reversal. Now here's an uncomfortable truth about women. We test. Not because we're cruel, because we're wired for it. Before we emotionally invest, something primal in us needs to know, will he hold or will he collapse? We go quiet without warning. We create small dramas. We hint at other options. We manufacture emotional weather just to see if you'll panic and start apologizing for the rain. And most men do. The apologies come fast. The justifications pour out. The desperate explanations pile up like evidence of insecurity. And the moment that happens, attraction drains like water through cracked glass. I once tried every version of the cold shoulder test on a man I was genuinely interested in. He pulled back hard. Waited for the spiral. Instead, nothing. He didn't chase. He didn't beg. He simply looked at me with this quiet certainty and said, Asterisco that kind of game doesn't land with me. Asterisco I felt completely exposed. Not angry, exposed, like he'd watched me try to pick a lock and smiled because he didn't have a keyhole. He wasn't playing defense. He wasn't even playing offense. He had simply opted out of the entire game. When a man shows a woman her emotional manipulation has no effect, he doesn't just win the moment. It fundamentally changes how she sees him. He goes from being someone she manages to someone she studies, from something she controls to something she wonders about. That wondering? That's where obsession begins. Almohadilla almohadilla asterisco phrase 3, the graceful exit. Let me describe a pattern you've probably lived. She starts drifting. Texts slow down. Responses become vague. She invents busyness. And you, sensing the distance, start rowing harder. More effort, more attention, more proof that you care. And what does she feel watching that? Relief that the control is hers. And somewhere deep underneath, quiet, uncomfortable disappointment. Because here's the ugly truth women will never say clearly, when you chase harder as we pull away, we lose something essential. The feeling that you are worth chasing. The belief that you are the prize. There was a man who completely dismantled my expectations with 4 words. He had gone cold on purpose, testing, waiting, expecting pursuit. Instead he sent me one message, calm as a clear morning, asterisco take all the space you need. Asterisco just that. No follow-up. No double text 2 hours later. No, are you okay? The silence that followed was suffocating, but not because of him. Because of me, my mind started doing uncomfortable math. What if he genuinely didn't need this? What if walking away was already decided in his head and I'd missed it? What if I'd miscalculated? The man willing to let go, genuinely, without performance, becomes the man impossible to let go of because every woman understands instinctively, the one who can leave without flinching is the one worth staying for. Almohadilla asterisco phrase 4, desire without desperation. I need to explain something about female attraction psychology that most dating advice completely distorts. Women don't fall for indifference. That's not the secret. Ice-cold emotional unavailability isn't attractive, it's just exhausting. What actually breaks through our defenses is something rarer and more complicated. Desire that doesn't need anything back. Most men either need too much, constant validation, constant closeness, constant reassurance, or they perform not needing as a strategy and we feel the performance instantly. It reads as fake. It's hollow. But genuine desire without desperation? That's a different frequency entirely. I remember a man who leaned back in his chair, looked at me with complete steadiness, and said something that hit differently than any compliment ever had. Asterisco, I'm drawn to you, but I'm not incomplete without you. Asterisco, my nervous system responded before my logic did. Air prayed up. Skin warm. Mind suddenly calculating where I actually stood. Because he'd given me both things simultaneously, confirmation that he wanted me and proof that he didn't need me. And that combination is the most psychologically destabilizing thing a man can offer. We want to be chosen. But if our absence doesn't wound you, our presence becomes something we have to earn, and the moment we start trying to earn your attention, the game has completely flipped. Almohadilla asterisco phrase 5, the attention economy. There's a behavioral pattern in women that most of us won't confess publicly. When a man gives us everything freely, consistent attention, instant responses, constant availability, something in us recalibrates him downward. Not consciously. Not fairly. But it happens. It's not cruelty. It's psychology. Value is assessed partly through scarcity. The harder something is to access, the more our brain decides it must be worth accessing. He was casually pushing a man once about why he sometimes took so long to reply. Playing that card, using it as a little power move. He didn't justify himself. Didn't they explain his schedule? It just tilted his head slightly and said, almost amused, asterisco, my full attention isn't a default, it's something you earn. Asterisco, my pride flared. Genuinely. That ego sting in my chest that says how dare he, but beneath that, beneath the indignation, something far more inconvenient was happening. He wanted to earn it. Suddenly I wasn't the one determining whether it was worth my time. He was asking myself whether he was worth asterisco his. Asterisco, the reversal happened in one sentence and I didn't even see it coming. Men who give everything up front give women nothing to move toward. Create distance, real, earned distance, and suddenly you become the destination. Almohadilla asterisco phrase 6, the throne declaration. Women will never admit this publicly, but here's what's true in private. We respect men who compete for no one. Not because arrogance is attractive, arrogance is actually repellent. But because a man who has stopped competing signals something rare and deeply magnetic. He's already decided he's enough. I once casually dropped a reference to having options, the way women sometimes do to trigger reassurance. He expected the usual response. A little tension, a little extra effort to prove value. Instead, this man didn't even shift in his seat. It just said, evenly, almost boredly, asterisco, I don't enter competitions for women's attention. That's not my dynamic. Asterisco, something collapsed in my chest. Because my entire maneuver had just been acknowledged and dismissed in the same breath. I wasn't holding leverage anymore. I was standing in a game he'd refused to play, alone. And then something even more uncomfortable happened. He started wondering if I was interesting enough for a man who didn't compete. I started mentally applying, that is the psychological reality of authentic confidence. When a man makes it clear he doesn't fight for position, he doesn't need to fight. Because women will quietly begin fighting for his almohadilla asterisco phrase 7, the boundary that burns. Here's something I'll admit that most women never will out loud. We sometimes mistreat men we're attracted to. Not because we don't care, sometimes because we care too much, and the vulnerability of that is terrifying. So we manage the threat by pushing. Cancel plans casually. Make small cutting comments. Withdraw warmth to see if the warmth comes running back. The man who lets this pass, who absorbs it with nervous tolerance, loses something critical each time. Our respect. Quietly, incrementally, irreversibly. But the man with a real, steady, unmovable boundary? It becomes the most unforgettable man in the room. He tested this once, behaving dismissively toward a man I actually found compelling, half expecting him to soften me with attention. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't they become cold or dramatic? It just said with complete calm, asterisco, the moment real disrespect shows up, I'm already walking. Asterisco, I felt it in my spine. Because it wasn't a threat wrapped in emotion, it was just a fact. Delivered without anger or performance. And I understood instantly that he absolutely meant it. That kind of self-respect, the kind that doesn't require you to explain it, perform it, or defend it, doesn't just command respect. It creates it. Against our own will. Almohadilla asterisco phrase 8, the liberation line. This is the phrase men are terrified to say. And that fear is exactly why it works. What terrifies most men isn't losing a particular woman. It's being alone. And women sense that fear like weather. We factor it into every decision. If a man needs us enough, he'll tolerate almost anything. That's not cynical, that's just the silent math most relationships run on. But when that math gets dismantled, when a man reveals he has genuinely made peace with solitude, it triggers something primal and irreversible. I was playing distant once with a man I genuinely wanted, expecting the familiar routine, proof of devotion, increased pursuit, some demonstration that I still mattered. Instead he looked at me without stress, without sadness, and said, asterisco, being alone is something I've learned to be comfortable with. Settling for a wrong connection isn't. Asterisco, something in my chest went hollow. Because he wasn't offering me a fight to win. It was offering me a standard to meet. Or not. The terror isn't that he'd leave. The terror is that he'd be fine, that his life without me was already whole. That I wasn't rescuing him from anything, I was either adding to something already complete, or I was unnecessary. That one realization turns a woman from someone who's being pursued into someone who's doing the pursuing. And she won't even fully understand when the switch flipped. Almohadilla asterisco phrase 9, the mirror move. Women are emotionally sophisticated. That's not a criticism, it's accurate. And that sophistication includes knowing how to weaponize emotion in an argument. Tears at the right moment. Strategic silence. Explosive reaction deployed to make a man stumble into apologies he doesn't owe. Most men rush to fix the emotional weather the moment it appears. Backtracking, softening, explaining, defending. And in that frantic rush to resolve her discomfort, he surrenders the entire frame of the conversation. But the man who doesn't rush, who simply observes, does something far more powerful. It reflects. I once snapped at a man during a conversation, deploying my sharpest tone expecting him to deflate. Instead he stayed still, studied me for a moment, and said quietly, asterisco, you're not actually angry right now. You're scared of something. Asterisco, everything in me froze. Because he wasn't reacting to my surface. It was reading my depth. And when someone sees beneath your performance, there's nowhere left to hide. The weapon I'd raised became a mirror I had to look into. Expose, not defended against. A man who mirrors a woman's emotional state doesn't get pulled into the storm. It makes her see that the storm was always hers. And once she feels genuinely seen, truly, uncomfortably seen, she can't unfeel it. She replays that moment. She compares every man against it. And most fall short. Almohadilla asterisco phrase 10, the re-entry price. Now here's a female behavioral secret that almost no one discusses directly. When a woman withdraws, goes cold, creates distance, disappears emotionally, she almost always comes back. This is not reconciliation. This is a power test. She's returning to confirm that her access to you remains intact, that you've been waiting, that your emotional door is still open and unguarded. And most men, flooded with relief, hand her everything immediately. Welcome her back with warmth, with openness, with the implicit message that her absence had zero consequences. And she logs that information. For next time. The man who permanently altered how I thought about this didn't yell. Didn't lecture. Didn't pour out the resentment he'd stored. He simply looked at me when I returned, calm and unmoved, and said, Asterisco, the version of you that left doesn't automatically get the same position back. Asterisco, my stomach dropped completely. Because my return wasn't being celebrated. It was being evaluated. It hadn't become desperate in my absence, he'd become more settled. And now I had to prove something, not assume something. That one response communicated more about his character than months of normal interaction could have. He didn't need the warmth of my return. He needed to see if I'd earned re-entry. And the terrifying, electrifying truth is, that made me want to. Almohadilla asterisco phrase 11, the undefeatable silence understands something about how women use the demand for explanation. When we push for justifications, when we circle back to arguments we've already had, when we ask but why a third and fourth time, we're rarely actually seeking understanding. We're remeasuring your insecurity. Every additional explanation you volunteer is data. This man needs me to approve of him. Every justification confirms that your emotional stability depends on our verdict. And men who need that approval become endlessly manageable. He once cornered a man with relentless demands for explanation about a decision he'd made. Round after round, looking for the moment he'd crack and start defending himself. Instead, after letting me exhaust every angle, he said it simply, without frustration, without coldness. Asterisco, I said it clearly once. He won't be walking it back or restating it. Asterisco, my chest tightened. Because the strategy had just been made irrelevant. There was nothing to extract because he wasn't defending anything. Ede already moved on in his own mind and I was the only one still standing at the door. The man who says what he means once and then lives it, without circling back, without seeking confirmation, creates a different kind of gravity. We can't destabilize him. We can't wear him down. And so we begin orbiting his certainty instead, trying to understand what's inside a man that's solid. Almohadilla asterisco phrase 12, the mission statement. It is what women in honest moments confess to each other. The men who haunt us are never the ones who made us the center. They're the ones who already had a center, and briefly, srilingly, led us near it. Men who orient their entire existence around a woman don't create devotion. They create pressure. We start to feel responsible for their happiness, their mood, their sense of purpose. And that responsibility becomes suffocating. Then, quietly, repellin. But a man who's building something, who has a vision he's already committed to, one who speaks about his life as though it's going somewhere with or without an audience. That man becomes irresistible. He was arguing with someone once, pushing for reassurance, demanding to know where I ranked in his priorities. He didn't list me. It didn't reassure me. He leaned forward slightly and said, Asterisco, this life I'm constructing goes on either way. What matters is whether you want to be part of it. Asterisco. I felt the hollow ache of someone who'd just been gently demoted from necessity to option, and then, immediately after, the desperate, primal urge to not be just an option, to be chosen specifically. Don't matter to a man who already mattered to himself. That's the dynamic no one explains. Make yourself the mission. Let her decide if she wants a supporting role in something bigger than both of you. Watch what happens to her certainty. Almohadilla asterisco phrase 13, the last word. Women regret many men. But there's a specific category of regret, quieter, deeper, permanent, reserved for a particular kind of man. Not the one who chased and was rejected. Not the one who tried everything and still failed. Those stories have closure baked in, we can file them away. The ones who haunt us forever are the men who called it, who looked at the situation clearly, stated the outcome calmly, and then disappeared into exactly the life they described. Without looking back. Without returning when we changed our minds. He once played games with a man I underestimated. Pushed too far. Pulled away assuming he'd absorb it. Instead, no drama, No final speech, he just looked at me once, quiet and certain, and said, asterisco long after this, you'll remember me. That part I'm already sure of. Asterisco I laughed it off. And then he left. And then, over weeks, months, in conversations with other men, in quiet evenings, in moments I didn't expect, I'd find that sentence sitting in my chest like a splinter that never fully surfaced. It was right. And knowing he was right before it happened, and saying it without cruelty, without performance, without even particularly caring if I believed him, that is the most psychologically devastating thing a man can offer a woman. Not the ones who beg. Not the ones who broke. The ones who knew, and walked. Here's what every one of these phrases shares beneath the surface. They don't seek approval. They don't explain unnecessarily. They don't soften or shrink or chase. They speak from a place that says, I already know who I am, and nothing you do changes that. Women don't surrender to manipulation. We surrender to men who are genuinely, irreversibly complete, men whose self-worth isn't up for negotiation. Men whose frame doesn't flex under pressure. Men who say less and mean all of it. I've watched women leave good, generous, devoted men, and spend years quietly destroyed over someone who barely tried. Because what that someone carried wasn't effort. It was certainty, and certainty is more addictive than almost anything else a man can offer. Every phrase you just learned is a window into that certainty. Not a script, a reflection of a man who has genuinely stopped seeking external validation and started building internal authority. That energy doesn't just attract women. It makes us question every choice we make without it. Hit subscribe. Because another layer of this gets exposed, and the man who hears it first is the man who stops wondering what went wrong and starts becoming what she can't forget.